We now move into part 6 of the series, Integration versus Separation in an Integrated Management System. Up to this point, we focused on how ISO 27001, ISO 27701, and ISO 42001 can be aligned into a single, integrated framework. But integration does not mean everything becomes the same. In this part, we shift focus to what must remain distinct across security, privacy, and AI. Because while the structure of the management system can be shared, the risks, objectives, controls, and outcomes across these domains are fundamentally different. Understanding this balance between integration and separation is critical to building an effective and audit-ready integrated management system. Before we go deeper into Part 6, let us briefly revisit the journey of the series. We started by introducing the three standards ISO 27001 for security, ISO 27701 for privacy, and ISO 42001 for artificial intelligence, and what an integrated management system actually is. From there, we explored Annex SL, which provides the common structure that makes integration possible, and then looked at how the clauses align across the standards. We then moved into the practical side, including integrated risk management, and how controls and the statement of applicability can be mapped across domains. Now, in this part, we focus on a critical shift: what must remain separate. Because while integration brings efficiency and consistency, not everything should be standardized. Different domains introduce different risks, requirements, and expectations, and understanding that balance is key. From here, the series continues into integrated operations, audits and assurance, management reviews, continual improvement, and ultimately the business value of an integrated approach. Integration is structural, and separation is operational. What this means is that organizations can build one unified management system across ISO 27001, ISO 27701, and ISO 42001. The framework is shared, and many controls and processes are aligned across all three domains. However, the risks, objectives, and outcomes are not the same. Security focuses on protecting systems and information. Privacy focuses on protecting individuals and personal data. And artificial intelligence introduces risks related to decisions, bias, and societal impact. So while the structure can be integrated, the execution must remain distinct. And this separation does not exist in one place only. It exists across the entire life cycle of the management system, from planning to operation to monitoring and continual improvement. This slide shows why separation matters across the life cycle of the management system. Using the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, we can see that while the structure is shared, the focus within each domain is different at every stage. In the planning phase, the context, risks, and objectives are not the same. Security focuses on systems, threats, and vulnerabilities, and the impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Privacy focuses on data subjects, personal information processing, and regulatory requirements, with an emphasis on impact to individuals. Artificial intelligence introduces a different type of context and risk, including bias, fairness, and decision impact. As we move into the Do phase, controls may appear similar, but their implementation differs. Security applies technical controls such as authentication and monitoring. Privacy introduces legal and process-based controls such as consent and data protection impact assessments. Artificial intelligence requires governance and model-based controls, including validation and bias checks. In the check phase, what we monitor and measure also changes. Security looks at incidents and vulnerabilities. Privacy focuses on compliance and personal data handling. Artificial intelligence focuses on model behavior, drift, and fairness. Finally, in the Act phase, improvement is driven by different root causes. Security improvements address technical and process failures. Privacy improvements address legal and compliance gaps. Artificial intelligence improvements focus on data, models, and decision outcomes. So while the life cycle is integrated, separation exists across every stage. Here's a high-level overview of how the clauses align in an integrated management system and where separation still applies. Starting with Clause 4, Context, this is partially integrated. The organization defines one overall context, but privacy and artificial intelligence introduce additional considerations such as data subjects, regulators, and societal impact. In Clause 5, Leadership, this is mostly integrated. However, specific roles such as privacy officers and artificial intelligence accountability roles must still be clearly defined, as regulatory and ethical responsibilities differ. Clause 6, Risk and Objectives, is also partially integrated. While one risk framework can be used, the types of risk differ across domains, including confidentiality, integrity and availability for security, impact to individuals for privacy, and bias and harm for artificial intelligence. Clause 7, Support, is largely integrated. The same framework for resources, awareness, communication, and documentation can be used, but the content must be tailored to each domain. Clause 8, Operation, is where separation becomes most visible. Core operational activities differ significantly, particularly in personal information processing and the artificial intelligence model lifecycle. Clause 9, Performance Evaluation, is partially integrated. Monitoring, measurement, and audit processes are shared, but what is measured differs across security, privacy, and artificial intelligence. Finally, Clause 10, Improvement, is integrated. The process for improvement is the same, but the root causes and outcomes will differ depending on the domain. This view reinforces that while the structure of the management system is integrated, separation exists across the clauses based on the nature of the risks and operations. We now move into the plan phase, starting with Clause 4, Context. This is where the organization defines the overall environment in which the management system operates. At an integrated level, there is one common framework that considers the business environment and organizational context. However, each domain introduces its own perspective. From a security point of view, the focus is on the threat landscape and technology-related risks. From a privacy perspective, the focus shifts to personal information processing, regulatory requirements, and the legal landscape. For artificial intelligence, the context includes use cases, as well as societal and ethical considerations. When identifying risk drivers, the structure is shared, but the nature of risk differs. Security considers cyber threats and system vulnerabilities. Privacy focuses on legal obligations and data sensitivity. Artificial intelligence introduces risks such as bias, fairness, and decision impact. The same applies to interested parties. The organization follows one process to identify stakeholders, but the stakeholders themselves differ across domains. Security includes customers, regulators, and suppliers. Privacy introduces data subjects and processes. Artificial intelligence includes users and impacted individuals. Requirements are also identified through one process, but the expectations differ. Security requirements focus on protecting systems. Privacy requirements focus on rights and legal obligations. Artificial intelligence introduces ethical expectations and transparency requirements. When defining scope, a single methodology is used. However, the scope itself differs. Security focuses on systems and infrastructure. Privacy focuses on personal information processing activities. Artificial intelligence focuses on systems, models, and use cases. Finally, the management system itself is structured as one integrated framework. But within that framework, the processes remain domain-specific, with distinct security, privacy, and artificial intelligence processes. This reinforces that even at the planning stage, the structure is integrated, but the context and focus remain distinct. We continue in the plan phase with Clause 5, Leadership. This clause focuses on governance, direction, and accountability within the management system. At an integrated level, leadership provides one framework for oversight, commitment, and alignment with the business. However, each domain introduces different responsibilities and expectations. From a security perspective, leadership ensures that the information security management system is governed and supported. In privacy, leadership must ensure accountability for personal information, including roles such as the privacy officer and oversight of regulatory obligations. In artificial intelligence, leadership extends into governance of models and decisions, including responsible artificial intelligence practices and ethical oversight. When it comes to risk integration, leadership uses one risk-based approach to support decision-making. But the types of risk differ. Security focuses on protecting systems and information. Privacy focuses on regulatory exposure and impact to individuals. Artificial intelligence introduces risks related to bias, fairness, and societal impact. Leadership is also responsible for ensuring that appropriate resources are available. While the process is shared, the types of resources differ across domains. Security requires technical and operational capabilities. Privacy requires legal and compliance expertise. Artificial intelligence requires data science, model governance, and specialized oversight. Policies are structured within one framework, but their content differs. Security policies focus on protecting systems and information. Privacy policies define commitments around personal data and legal obligations. Artificial intelligence policies introduce principles around ethical use, transparency, and trust. Finally, roles and responsibilities are defined within one structure, but accountability differs. Security accountability focuses on protecting systems. Privacy accountability is tied to legal obligations and data protection requirements. Artificial intelligence accountability extends to ethical decision-making and the impact of automated outcomes. This reinforces that leadership can be integrated at a structural level, but accountability and governance remain distinct across domains. We now move further into the plan phase with Clause 6, Planning. This is where the organization defines how risks are identified, assessed, treated, and translated into objectives and actions. At an integrated level, there is one common risk-based approach used across the management system. However, the types of risks differ significantly across domains. In security, the focus is on information security risks, particularly confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In privacy, the focus shifts to risks related to personal information, legal obligations, and the impact on individuals. In artificial intelligence, risks include bias, harm, misuse, and the impact of automated decisions. The risk assessment process follows a shared methodology, but the inputs and analysis differ. Security looks at threats, vulnerabilities, and system impact. Privacy uses approaches such as data protection impact assessments, focusing on lawful processing and data subject impact. Artificial intelligence introduces risk assessment considerations such as bias, explainability, and decision impact. When it comes to risk treatment, the structure remains consistent, supported by the statement of applicability. However, the controls selected differ. Security relies on technical and organizational controls. Privacy introduces controls such as consent, data minimization, and rights management. Artificial intelligence requires controls such as model validation, bias mitigation, and governance oversight. Objectives are also defined through one framework, but again, the focus differs. Security objectives focus on availability and access control. Privacy objectives focus on compliance and reducing breaches. Artificial intelligence objectives focus on model performance, fairness, and trust. Planning to achieve these objectives includes measurement, ownership, timelines, and resources. While the structure is shared, the key performance indicators differ across domains. Finally, planning of changes follows one process, but the nature of change differs. Security focuses on system and infrastructure changes. Privacy focuses on changes to data processing and legal impact. Artificial intelligence focuses on model changes, retraining, and the impact on outcomes. This reinforces that planning is integrated in structure, but separation exists in how risks, controls, and objectives are defined and managed. The statement of applicability, which acts as the integration bridge within the management system. At a structural level, controls are shared across all domains. For example, controls such as multi-factor authentication, logging, and access control can be applied across security, privacy, and artificial intelligence. However, what changes is not the control itself, but how it is justified, how it links to risk, and what evidence supports it. From a justification perspective, the same control serves a different purpose in each domain. In security, it is used to prevent unauthorized access to systems and information. In privacy, it is used to protect personal data and ensure lawful processing. In artificial intelligence, it is used to ensure controlled and fair use of systems and models. When we look at risk linkage, the same control is mapped to different risks. In security, the risk may be a data breach. In privacy, the risk is harm to a data subject. In artificial intelligence, the risk may be biased or harmful outcomes. In addition, controls are extended differently. Privacy introduces requirements such as consent and lawful basis. Artificial intelligence introduces requirements such as bias checks and human oversight. So while the control is the same, the justification, the risk linkage, and the supporting evidence are all different. This is why the statement of applicability is such a critical component in an integrated management system. It is where integration and separation come together. We now move into the do phase, starting with Clause 7, Support. This clause focuses on the resources, competence, awareness, communication, and documented information required to operate the management system. At an integrated level, there is one common framework that supports all domains. For resources, the organization uses a central approach to planning, budgeting, and tooling. However, the types of resources differ. Security requires tools such as monitoring systems and identity management, as well as security operations capability. Privacy requires tools for managing personal information, data mapping, and legal support. Artificial intelligence requires platforms for model development, monitoring, and validation. The same applies to competence. There is one unified competency framework, but the skills differ across domains. Security requires technical and incident response expertise. Privacy requires legal and regulatory knowledge. Artificial intelligence requires data science, model validation, and fairness expertise. Awareness is delivered through one program, but the content is tailored. Security focuses on threats such as phishing and access control. Privacy focuses on handling personal information and data subject rights. Artificial intelligence focuses on ethics, responsible use, and bias awareness. Communication is also managed through one framework. However, the type of communication differs. Security includes alerts and incident communication. Privacy includes notices, data subject requests, and regulatory reporting. Artificial intelligence includes transparency, model limitations, and stakeholder communication. Finally, documented information is managed through one system, but the records themselves differ. Security includes policies, risk registers, and logs. Privacy includes data protection impact assessments, processing records, and consent records. Artificial intelligence includes model documentation, validation records, and bias reports. This demonstrates that support functions are integrated in structure, but separation exists in the content and expertise required across each domain. Looking at controls that are aligned across standards. This slide shows that many controls are structurally the same across ISO 27001, ISO 27701, and ISO 42001. For example, identity and access management, data protection, monitoring, incident management, and supplier management all exist across the three standards. These controls share a common intent. They are designed to restrict access, protect sensitive data, manage incidents, and ensure governance and oversight. However, while the control exists across all domains, its application is not identical. In privacy, controls are extended to address personal information, including classification, data subject rights, and lawful processing. In artificial intelligence, controls extend further to include model access, training data protection, and monitoring of model behavior and outputs. This means that the same control can be implemented across the integrated management system, but must be adapted to address the specific risks and requirements of each domain. So this slide demonstrates integration at the control level. The structure is shared, and the intent is aligned. But the implementation still needs to consider security, privacy, and artificial intelligence separately. This slide builds on the previous view by showing how controls differ across domains, even when they are based on the same integrated structure. At the center, we have the integrated controls based on ISO 27001, which form the baseline for the management system. These include areas such as governance and risk management, access control, data protection, monitoring, incident management, and supplier management. However, when we extend these controls into privacy and artificial intelligence, the differences become clear. In privacy, controls are expanded to address personal information. This includes requirements such as data protection impact assessments, lawful basis for processing, data minimization, and data subject rights. In artificial intelligence, controls are further extended to address model-related risks. This includes governance of artificial intelligence systems, bias and fairness considerations, model validation, and monitoring of outputs. Across each control area, the same pattern applies. The baseline control is shared, but the implementation is extended to address domain-specific risks and requirements. For example, access control in security focuses on systems and users. In privacy, it includes access to personal information. In artificial intelligence, it extends to access to models and model permissions. Similarly, data protection in security focuses on encryption and classification. In privacy, it includes purpose limitation and retention. In artificial intelligence, it includes protection of training data and output integrity. This reinforces a key point. Controls are integrated in structure, but their execution must be tailored. Each domain introduces its own risks, obligations, and expectations. Clause 8. Operation, where the integrated management system is executed in practice. This is where plans become actions. Across all domains, the structure remains consistent. Operational planning, risk assessment, and risk treatment all follow the same process. However, what is being executed differs. Security focuses on system operations, monitoring, and technical controls. Privacy focuses on data processing activities and legal obligations. And AI focuses on model operations, lifecycle management, and decision outcomes. Risk assessment and treatment also follow a shared methodology, but the risks themselves differ, from cyber threats to personal data risks to bias and unintended AI outcomes. The key takeaway is that execution is integrated, but the operational activities remain domain-specific. For more detailed breakdowns, refer to the appendix. We now move into the check phase with Clause 9, Performance Evaluation. This is where the organization monitors, measures, audits, and reviews the effectiveness of the management system. At an integrated level, there is one monitoring and measurement framework. This includes shared key performance indicators, tools, and reporting structures. However, what is being measured differs across domains. In security, the focus is on control effectiveness, incidents, and vulnerabilities. In privacy, the focus is on personal information processing, data subject requests, breaches, and compliance. In artificial intelligence, the focus is on model performance, bias, drift, and overall outcomes. The tools used may be shared, such as dashboards and monitoring platforms, but they are applied differently. Security uses tools such as monitoring systems and alerts. Privacy uses platforms for tracking personal data and compliance activities. Artificial intelligence uses tools for monitoring models, detecting anomalies, and assessing performance. Evaluation follows one process, but the interpretation differs. Security evaluates control effectiveness and risk reduction. Privacy evaluates compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. Artificial intelligence evaluates model behavior, fairness, and decision quality. Internal audits are conducted through one integrated program. However, the scope of audits differs. Security audits focus on systems and technical controls. Privacy audits focus on personal information lifecycle and compliance. Artificial intelligence audits focus on models, decision processes, and governance. The audit methodology is shared, but the evidence and testing differ. Security involves technical testing and control validation. Privacy involves compliance checks and validation of processes such as impact assessments. Artificial intelligence involves model validation, bias testing, and governance review. Findings are reported through one structure, but the types of findings differ across domains. Finally, management review is conducted through one process. Inputs and outputs are aligned, but the content differs. Security focuses on performance and risk. Privacy focuses on compliance and regulatory exposure. Artificial intelligence focuses on performance, bias, and governance. This demonstrates that while performance evaluation is integrated in structure, separation exists in what is measured, how it is assessed, and how decisions are made. We now move into the ACT phase with Clause 10, Continual Improvement. This is where the management system closes the loop, taking insights from monitoring, audits, and operations, and turning them into meaningful improvement. At an integrated level, there is one continuous improvement framework. This includes a shared process for identifying issues, analyzing root causes, implementing corrective actions, and reviewing effectiveness. However, the inputs into improvement differ across domains. In security, inputs include incidents and audit findings related to control failures. In privacy, inputs include breaches, data subject requests, and compliance gaps. In artificial intelligence, inputs include model issues, bias findings, and performance concerns. The improvement actions follow one structured approach, but the nature of those actions differs. Security improvements focus on strengthening controls and reducing risk. Privacy improvements focus on updating processes and ensuring compliance with legal requirements. Artificial intelligence improvements focus on model performance, bias mitigation, and governance updates. When nonconformities occur, the identification and response process is consistent. However, the type of nonconformity differs. Security may identify control failures. Privacy may identify compliance breaches. Artificial intelligence may identify incorrect or harmful outputs. Root cause analysis is also conducted through one process. But again, the causes differ. Security issues may stem from technical or process failures. Privacy issues may arise from legal or process gaps. Artificial intelligence issues may be linked to data quality, model design, or algorithm behavior. Corrective actions are then implemented and reviewed. While the process is shared, the outcomes differ. Security focuses on restoring control effectiveness. Privacy focuses on re-establishing compliance. Artificial intelligence focuses on improving model performance and fairness. This final phase reinforces the overall message. The management system is integrated in structure, but improvement remains domain-specific in execution. So what does this mean for you in practice? If you are implementing an integrated management system, you need to design for both integration and separation. This means building one unified framework while ensuring that risks, controls, and processes are tailored to security, privacy, and artificial intelligence. If you are auditing, you need to look for both. You should expect to see a single integrated structure, but also clear evidence that each domain is being addressed appropriately. And if you are leading, you need to make decisions across all domains. This means understanding how security, privacy, and artificial intelligence risks interact, and ensuring that governance and oversight reflect all three perspectives. Ultimately, success comes from balancing integration with separation. To close, Here are the key takeaways. An effective integrated management system is not about merging everything. It is about aligning what can be shared and clearly distinguishing what must remain separate. Integration creates efficiency, but it does not mean uniformity. There is one framework, but multiple risk lenses. Controls may overlap, but their execution differs across security, privacy, and artificial intelligence. The statement of applicability plays a critical role as the translation layer between risk, controls, and evidence. And importantly, auditors will expect to see both integration and separation clearly demonstrated. For those who want to explore this in more detail, I have included appendices that provide a deeper, clause-by-clause and control-level view across the domains. Looking ahead, in Part 7 we will focus on integrated audit and assurance. This will include how auditors assess an integrated system, what evidence is expected across domains, and how to demonstrate compliance clearly.